right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our fourth installment of the Racial Justice 101 series, brought to you by the NAACP Greater Fairbanks and the Diversity and Action Center. My name is Joe Malvern Narvaez. I use he and they pronouns, and I currently serve as a member of the Community Coordination Committee, who is the committee who's been working hard on making sure that the Racial Justice 101 series continues. We have a really great topic today, and we're really excited that you're here. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the lands upon whose where we're located. So the NAACP Greater Fairbanks branch and the NAACP Diversity and Action Center acknowledge that we are located in the unceded traditional lands of the Lower Tanana Dene people. We honor the continued fight for the rights of our First Peoples and stand with them in solidarity and in action towards justice. And if you want to learn more about whose land you're currently occupying, you can visit native-land.ca, and they have a really great service where you can text the city and state, or the city and province that you're located, and it will share some information about whose land you're located at that moment. Before we begin, I'd like to just give you all some tools on how we can engage successfully in our time together today. So please use the chat function on your Zoom toolbar, which is at the bottom of your screen, and submit all questions to the user who is designated as Ask Questions here. This user is right now a co-host, so they should be close to the top of your list, and it's just to make it easier for us to filter these questions. All these questions that you have for our speaker today will be answered during our Q&A section at the end. But if you have any particular questions or technical difficulties, we do have a team that they'll be working on communicating with you and answering to you directly. And for any questions that you may have regarding the NAACP or the Diversity and Action Center, you can email either organization at for the NAACP, it's Fairbanks naacp@gmail.com. And for the Diversity and Action Center is uaf-ndac@alaska.edu. All right, so I am very happy to be able to introduce our guest speaker for tonight. Reketta, she, her, is a licensed professional counselor and a BIPOC health equity consultant. She's a Health at Every Size advocate and a member of the Association for Size Diversity and Health. Reketta loves globetrotting, swimming, and taking naps. If you're interested in finding out more about Reketta and her work, feel free to go to arisecounselingllc.com and rspconsultingllc.com. And without further ado, I introduce you all Reketta Peterson.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you. The NAACP Fairbanks branch, as well as the Racial Justice 101 family. Today, I am honored to walk you guys through a presentation on BIPOC health disparities. I'm going to be focusing on Black and Indigenous communities. Of course, one, I am Black, and two, we are in Alaska. So I would like to touch on the disparities that we are experiencing here. I'm going to share my screen as soon as I see first. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and then hit slideshow. There we go. Okay. All right. So can everyone see what I have on the screen? Best practices to reduce BIPOC health disparities. Good. Okay, thank you. So again, my name is Reketta. I'm a licensed professional counselor and a BIPOC health equity consultant, and my pronouns are she and her. All right, so I would also like to do my land acknowledgement, which is that I live, work, and educate, raise children on the land of the Chena people. I honor the past and the present generations of love and lost traditions and land. It's up to you, the reader, to take time to learn more about the Chena people and the Dene Nation. This is and will always be the land of the people, and you can learn more at nativeland.ca. All right, so I want to do an icebreaker. I want you to drop in the chat, X-Men, what multi-universe are they a part of? If you know the answer, just drop it in the chat. And let's see how many people know what multi-universe they are from. And we'll just take a minute here for that. So we have some answers coming in. Oh, I love that, Lois. Not a clue. I didn't know either, Lois, so this is why I chose this little icebreaker. Oh, April. Heather said she asked her son. Heather, I'm sorry. She, her. Marvel. I got a lot of Marvels right now. Thank you, Heather. Marvel, Marvel, Marvel. Okay, so you are correct if you did say Marvel. Da, 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 da. Can clap, all of the good things. Yes, they are from the Marvel universe. I'm watching DC Titans now during my not so free time, so I just found out that they are not a part of DC universe. Okay, so let's keep going. All right, so our agenda for today, I'm going to ask the audience to reflect on ways that they have applied concepts from previous DEI experiences, trainings and seminars and lectures. I want us to briefly look at a provider framework to address systemic oppression and racism. We're going to view concerns of BIPOC birthing persons. We're going to revisit the biopsychosocial models as the basis to inclusive practices and look at actionable steps that we can apply in practice as early as tomorrow. So I want to just briefly say that I use the term birthing person to be more inclusive. I have seen people use birthing people, but I just prefer birthing person. Next. Okay, so DEI trainings are great, but where does accountability come into play? Who is there to provide encouragement to step out and apply the concepts you have learned? Where's the guidance to recognize blind spots and do the repair work? And how can we put into action what we have learned? So I want to address some of these questions today. And our objective is to recognize the barriers keep us from reflecting on our pain spots and preventing growth and forward movement as a provider. Revisit the definition of structural racism and look at racism on a continuum, look at the impact of medical racism and what it's in the healthcare system, specifically for BIPOC birthing persons, and consider how your position on the continuum has led to missed opportunities for intentional action. All right. So I'm gonna breeze past that and we're gonna start here. So when you help an individual of color safely give birth, you assist with the creation of a bridge, allowing a person to reconcile the trauma, opening a window of opportunity to heal the future. Our framework looks like self-awareness, consideration, intentional action, and effective change. Self-awareness is our first step in our pyramid here. And as we go through this, we will recognize what is our part in our role anti-racism work and the spirit that we do will take care of our clients and or patients. So self-awareness. There are 3 reasons why BIPOC maternal mortality rates continue to exist in the healthcare field. So right here, I did use maternal mortality rate. Currently, the CDC uses a binary language here. And currently, Black and Indigenous women of color are 2 to 3 times more likely to die from a childbirth-related complication than our white counterparts. After the age of 30, that rate increases to 4 times for Black women. So we have structural racism, internal conflict, better known as denial, and personal uncertainty are three reasons why our maternal mortality rate is at an all-time high. And the CDC says that 60% of the deaths that we have are preventable. So what got this infamous iceberg here where we see racism at the top, what's visible. People saying things, microaggressions, et cetera, but beneath that surface, we have institutionalized racism. And just to point out a few of them, there's whiteness as a default, wealth disparities, what we're going to talk about today, access to healthcare, and healthcare disparities. So let's start. Racism as a continuum. When we think about racism, most people are on this end of the spectrum. We know that's pretty much wrong. Burning crosses in the yard, protesting against CRT in schools, trying to justify the protest by saying that it's much for them to learn in school, them being white students, because when students of color are coming into the system, they are already aware of race. And then we continue on with the idea of I don't see color, colorblindness, which in turn tells me that you don't see me and the struggles that I have as a Black woman that has a larger body, you don't see me. And our face here, guys. And then lastly, oh, there, I'm at the bottom. Good. Lastly, we have, if I say anything to offend you, please let me know. And then you tell the person, they say, oh, I didn't mean it that way. I think you misunderstood. So there's that gaslighting that goes on as well. So there's a bit of an explanation here that I already went through. And then lastly, my personal favorite when it comes to anti-racism work is, will there be CEUs for this? Yes. So also, when we are trying to do the work, sometimes there shouldn't be a benefit that you receive. It's the work of just wanting to dismantle white supremacy and systemic oppression. So structural racism, it looks like medical racism, which we'll talk more about today, the wealth gap, the education gap, redlining, and housing disparities. We're focusing on access to adequate health care and uniform medical procedures and experimentation. When we look at medical racism, we have the history of uninformed and forced medical procedures and experimentations. We're thinking, some people are familiar with the Tuskegee experiment. We're thinking Henrietta Lacks. We're thinking of enslaved women who were forced into medical procedures without their knowledge, uninformed. We're thinking of health disparities due to lack of access to quality healthcare facilities, medical kidnapping, present day uninformed care, and disapproval and eventual elimination of midwives and traditional health practices. This is important for both Black and Indigenous individuals because in both cultures, the medicalization of birth was pretty much placed at the center. And midwives in traditional health practices were seen or told to everyone that they were dirty, uneducated, misinformed, unhealthy. And eventually there was the to hospital. And now at midwifery today, it's pretty much white women. Okay, so we just went through structural racism really quickly and medical racism. So with that, if I want to go back really quickly, basically I would like for us to see that structural racism is the umbrella, and under that we have so much, but we were focused today on medical racism. I do want to take a brief pause to see if anyone had any questions that I can answer right now. I that we'll take questions at the end, but if anything was more pressing right now, I would be more than happy to talk about it. If not, I will move on to part 2, which was inner conflict, better known as denial. And so defensiveness stops any progress before the interaction gets started. And the term puts people on guard. So when we look at racism and doing the work, a lot of people don't like being called out. And of course, that's very uncomfortable. And of course, no one wants to be canceled. But in turn, we have this resistance. And so this is a really huge quote, but I really wanted us to focus on the last sentence here, where Dr. Burgo talks about, we've repressed shame and we feel threatened by anything that might make us feel ashamed, and we find it difficult to accept responsibility for mistakes that we make, blaming others instead. This is in terms what could happen when you are uncomfortable with doing the work or having someone say that is not enough. Moving on, so how does it pertain to you? Repression is a way to avoid a level of shame one cannot bear to feel. In a space of doing the work of anti-racism, we have people unwilling to look at content because it brings up the shame of colonialization, discrimination, and oppression. And there's also the trauma and pain that BIPOC providers can experience if they are connected to a history of inner turmoil. So we're gonna move on to uncertainty. This is the final of the 3. And so with uncertainty, we know we make mistakes. And some of us are afraid to make mistakes because of being called out, because of cancel culture. And I have to just be more aware of why we might not be willing to take a chance and dive deeper into this work. Uncertainty, it looks like the thought of saying the wrong thing. Unsure of how to put what we learned from a training into action. Unwillingness to pay for further expansion into anti-racism work, and the unwillingness to take uncertainty seriously enough to find the right resources. And so instead of us actually going, well, maybe starting with Google, we would prefer to ask a client, which decenters the client because we're asking the client to center us and take care of our needs before we actually take care of the client's needs. And coming as a person of color, as a Black woman who has been in medical rooms, it is uncomfortable for me to have to hold space for you when I'm here to get a service. And so I just want us to recognize that when we do, we're not asking you to know everything, but it's the ability to say, well, I don't know, and being brave enough to go out and find the answer on your own. And so that you can come back into your office, and center the client. All right, so we just left self-awareness. Now we're moving on to consideration. So I have a question for you, and I want you to, if you feel comfortable, drop an answer in the chat. You can drop an emoji. If you are a parent and you experienced the moment you found out you were expecting, what were some of your first feelings and or emotions? And I'll give us a minute here. And I won't be able to see the questions or the answers, right? Oh, you see it now. Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you, Logan. So thank you for the answers coming in. I'm enjoying the responses here. We got nervous and excited, excitement and terror, anxiety, joy, mix of excitement. Loving this. Thank you for sharing that. 30 more seconds here. If anyone would like to share. Okay, so we will move on. So I took a small survey of about 50 BIPOC individuals, and I asked them, when you first discovered you were pregnant, what were your feelings? And a lot of people said they had mixed feelings. We had about 66% say they had mixed feelings. We did not do that yet. And then we had, I'm trying to move our little video of ourselves. 8% say fear, concern, and 26% say elation and joy. And if I may disclose myself, I would put myself in the fear and concern category when I discovered that I was expecting. Okay, so I also asked these individuals if you had fear or concern or even mixed feelings. Where did that come from? Overwhelming majority said the BIPOC mortality rate the fear. Second was financial concerns, and we understand that for individuals of color, depending on your actual race, we have Black women who are sitting at 63 cents to the white man's dollar. Latinx women are sitting at 52 cents to the white man's dollar. And I want to say, I don't want to misquote this, we are lower with Indigenous individuals. So next came our providers' bedside manner, and then finally relationship concerns. And for that piece, for Black women, we have a higher divorce rate than we have marriage rate currently in this country. All right, so I have some quotes from some individuals. It's anonymous, but they shared their concerns. I saw something in the chat. Okay, so I will answer that question. Let's go on with our quote that I have. And this individual said, it was after delivery that I felt unseen and dismissed from nurses in recovery after traumatic birth experience. The baby ended up in the NICU. I was left in severe pain and debilitated from the side effects of the epidural. No one checked on me for over 8 hours, and it made it seem like I was irrational for expecting better care. And then we have, providers gave mixed messages regarding my high-risk pregnancy. And I want to go back to what I said earlier about the uninformed care. This individual was stating that they had mixed messages, they weren't getting that care or the information that they would have liked to have received. And they continued that towards the end of my pregnancy, I wondered if they even knew what was going on. I didn't have a problem with my actual OB, but didn't care for the maternal fetal specialist. And lastly, I have this quote. With my first, I felt safe and heard. With my second, I felt unheard. And like I was receiving the bare minimum in care. So lots of comments like this, where individuals were saying they felt unheard, they didn't feel seen, and they felt like they were receiving the bare minimum of care. And I want to address medical racism in the field of perinatal health, because racism is under-recognized and not often addressed in healthcare settings because it continues to take on a new and different form. So it's not easy to recognize. Earlier, I mentioned medical kidnapping, which actually came from an individual that I met a month or so ago. I had no idea, so I went and did some research on it. And I'm wondering if anyone else is familiar with that term. We recently had um, a high profile news. Her children were taken from her because the doctor felt like the children were not being well taken care of. So these concerns are concerns that people have every day. If I was to go into a medical facility, what will happen? Will my children be taken away from me? All right, so I want to look at this continuum again. I brought it back up. We have the standard idea of racism, the burning of the crosses in the yard, the saying of words and racial slurs. We have acceptable racism. I would say that would be the CRT protests and microaggressions. And then we have the actual anti-racism work, which is always, it's ongoing. You don't come to an end point. This is forever because racism and oppression is it's structural, it's institutionalized, and we have to dismantle it. And so in our lifetime, this work will continue. All right, so medical racism in BIPOC communities. It looks like the infant mortality rate. Presently, Black infants are dying at 2.8 times the rate of white infants. And next month is Infant Mortality Awareness Month. It's tomorrow next month, so in October. And second to Black infants are Indigenous infants. So, and they were at 0.83% per 1,000 births. Healthcare disparities, shortened lifespans, higher incidences of heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes. And with that comes the idea of having our own traditional food and culture and it being replaced with the colonizers' food and their culture. The BIPOC maternity mortality rate, which we've been talking about, misdiagnosis, and underdiagnosis. And so if I were to speak to that outside of the birthing realm, the misdiagnosis is that Black individuals are more likely to be diagnosed with schizophrenia, and it's a misdiagnosis because our symptoms look different from our white counterparts. And then we have the underdiagnosis, where Black women are underdiagnosed for ADHD. The symptoms of inactivity looks like laziness or denial or defiance, not wanting to do the work, whereas it's actually a neurodivergent medical concern. All right, so now it's time for us to consider a couple of things here. I've moved a little video again. I want us to consider when we are working with individuals, the biopsychosocial model. And so this model encompasses everything about an individual and not just one piece or one part of an individual's world. So we're looking at not only just age and genetics, but we're looking at interpersonal relationships, the socioeconomic standpoint, the mental health and the emotional health, beliefs and expectations, such as religion and values. And as we consider that, I want us to move with intentional action, which means we're using less assumptions and asking more questions by using the biopsychosocial model. Our questions need to be client-centered, free of judgment, neutral, and reflexive. And so my example was, I see you have a history of, it could be whatever, I'll throw out high blood pressure. I'd like to hear your understanding of the diagnosis. What do you know about it so far? Because then you're not assuming this person is ignorant or doesn't come from a place of understanding at all. We're not making assumptions. What we're doing is we're getting to that person through just interaction and being attuned to their needs. All right, so I want us to also think about some shame-informed techniques. This comes from Patty Ashley. She has a book called Shame-Informed Therapy. And I would like for us as providers and individuals that work with clients, BIPOC clients, to consider we have our old story where we made assumptions, where there were times where we probably could have done more work or we decentered our client, and move towards a more of a new story where we're not making assumptions, where we are centering the client, where we are being attuned to the client's needs while they are in our presence. So how do we create a safer, more affirming relationship with the client? We're not walking in with assumptions, and we're not just treating one of the three. We're going to ask questions until we feel comfortable enough to fill out this model and get the information. So for example, this person that has the history of high blood pressure and depression also walks through life experiencing racism and has racial trauma history that they have to navigate through for pretty much the rest of their lives. So are we aware that racism and dealing with racial trauma does increase stress and the stress levels that we deal with? Also socioeconomics, that can increase stress. So just filling out the model so that we recognize and understand that it might not just be a person disregarding what you would like for them to do when you ask them to, I don't know, go on a walk, eat healthier, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so we briefly went through consideration. I want to move forward with intentional action. And these are the steps we take to address or dismantle racism. And we're walking with an open heart and an open mind. And so I want to ask this question. You don't have to put anything in the chat, but how often has a white person joined in a protest or a meeting only to overtop someone in that meeting or assume what's best for the other group? Now, in my experience, I've had this happen several times. I'm sure other people would also agree that this happened to them, but it's the actual thought of I'm engaging in the work, but when you're actually there, you're not being intentional. You're not aware that you're still bringing in the ideas of structural racism and oppression. So we just have to be more aware of where we are and who we are in a group setting. All right, and then I just put here, anti-racism work goes beyond Google. So as I was saying, if we're gonna be more intentional, we need to recognize that Black people are not a monolith. A person from the South Side of Chicago will not be the same person that is from Fairbanks, Alaska. It's just not the same. And we have to be careful not to lump groups of people together. East Asian culture is not the same as the Southeast Asian culture. We need to identify that as well. And also just consider individual traumatic experiences. And that's really important too. All right, so intentional action looks like recognizing weight and weight stigma is rooted in anti-Blackness. Education levels will not help or move our client out of a circumstance. And the same with the socioeconomic status. So the CDC stats say, even if we remove the education level and the socioeconomic status for Black women, we are still 4 times as likely to die from childbirth-related complications. All right, so with intentional action, we are moving towards effective change. This is the last piece of this pyramid. So with our present day reality, as long as there is structural racism, there will always be room to grow, and anti-racism work to filter through. As long as there is historical trauma living inside of the bodies of our patients and our clients, as well as ourselves, there will still be a need for anti-racism work. So I want to talk about some actionable steps that you can take today. Well, tomorrow, because we're off work. You can create a resource list of BIPOC providers in your area. This is doulas, mental health professionals, pediatricians, midwives, and local support groups. But on top of that, I would also invite you to make it a warm handoff and get to know the BIPOC providers in your area. I'm wondering if we are more intentional with getting to know people outside of our immediate group. And that's really important. So that if you were to refer a client, it doesn't just look like you're dropping someone off. It's, hey, have you met so-and-so? Hey, have you met Reketta? She's amazing. She does this, this, and that. She is great with this. Things like that. Like you are just having a warm handoff, and that helps the client feel seen and heard. You understood what they are looking for in a provider, and you were able to hand off and know that they're in good hands. That's also important. So I want to take a look at the checklist again really quickly about self-awareness and working through internal conflict. These two are really important because I think from the experience of a person who walks into an office, I am aware of whether or not a person is judging me. I am aware because I know this person is not really attuned. This person sees me, sees the paperwork, sees that it says obese on the paperwork, and has made assumptions about me. What we're looking for is a yes and approach. So yes, I may be considered according to the science that is out there. Well, there's more if you are familiar with Hayes, Health at Every Size, that they say that I am obese, therefore I should have more medical complications. But you're also asking me about a history of depression in the family. You're also asking me about how are things at home. You're just asking me about things so that you can get to know me on a personal level. And it's not dismissing the science and the facts that you are familiar with, but you're also bringing into account that there's also more to the story. There's more to a person. We're checking ourselves on judgment. Again, just making sure that we're just not automatically assuming that they see a person in a larger body and out, they're not healthy, they don't do the things. There are so many reasons why. And first and foremost, not all of us will fit into a stereotypical body of thinness, this whiteness, by the way. And so we also need to be familiar with Hayes, Health at Every Size. There are really good resources out there where we talk about not everyone will fit into the body of work that has been presented to us and I guess more mainstream media platforms. I would encourage neutrality, address healthcare concerns, and you can find that on the Hayes website, and that does include high blood pressure. It's not saying dismiss nutrition and facts of that nature. It's actually, it includes that, but in a more of a late neutral way. Be self-reflective. So are we putting our judgment onto this client? And can the client feel that is what this is about. And so lastly, I have a few questions here that we can go over. And this is just like a little vignette. So we have an overweight Black woman who enters the office, and it's a 6-week postpartum checkup. She voices concerns of a racing heart rate, inability to sleep through the night, and has an elevated blood pressure. So this overweight Black woman is me. This is me. And I've had this experience before. And I came in, and right off the bat, I was told, just walk. just lose weight. Whereas I was a woman who just had a baby, had, stresses of a baby, and I felt like my concerns were not heard. So my question, I have two questions that I want to pop up. What questions are we asking the individuals? What questions would you ask me? We've known each other all of 40 minutes. What questions would you ask me knowing me now? And how would you be more relatable and center me and attune to my needs based on everything that we just discussed? And lastly, what is the atmosphere like? How is the room? Am I feeling supported? Do you see me as a person? All of those things are really important. And so that is where I am ending it here. If you feel comfortable enough, you can always provide feedback right now, or we can always start with the Q&A. All right, so I don't see anything dropping in the chat. I did receive my own personal direct message. I don't want to call the person out, but I can answer the question. So can a non-person of color appropriately become an ally? I think for me, oh, okay. All right, Logan. So, Will, we do have some people typing questions into the account, and you can still do that. Someone just direct message me. Oh, thank you, Logan. So Logan has some questions, and I'm sorry, Logan, can I call you out? I already did. In regards to my little vignette. So Logan was saying that they would ask, how's your baby been sleeping, and what support do you have at home? Lovely, wonderful questions, and it makes me feel actually seen and heard, because baby has not been sleeping. Even as of last night, baby has not been sleeping. So there you go. Wonderful question. Anyone else? And I don't have to say your name, by the way, if you would like to just direct message me. But in the meantime, I will go back to that question. How can a non-person of color appropriately become an ally? I think that's an awesome question. In my opinion, because there are so many opinions, some people believe that you can't be an actual ally. I would just be mindful of performative allyship. So I want to go back to what I mentioned about joining these protests and marches, but then you are over talking someone, or you are in someone else's space and not being aware of your surroundings and aware of the privilege that you hold. So I would just be mindful. I guess being mindful is one of the ways that you can appropriately become an ally. And Will, I will have to stop sharing or these questions that are being typed into that document.
Yeah, I have a few. Do you want me to put them in the chat, Reketta?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Oh, hey, Reketta. Sorry, I was having problems with my mute button. So I can read the questions for you if that it makes it easier.
Okay.
Yeah, so the question is, what are some of the discussions that are taking place after you introduced this information to medical providers?
Okay, so that's a really good question. I will say for some individuals, it has been an aha moment when we come back on for the affinity group. So normally, typically I will have something like this where I'm talking, and then we come back and we meet on a more personal level. And so I have this individual walk into my office, and I immediately made an assumption or passed a judgment, and I just thought about what we talked about during that lecture, and it was really an aha moment for me. So basically, there was a lot of just coming to an understanding that we do continue to have these great important individuals.
Great, thank you so much. So another question that we have is, from the BIPOC perspective, what are some steps that we can recognize, or what are some steps that we can use to recognize medical racism when it's happening, and how can we protect ourselves? Oh, Reketta, it seems that we lost. Oh, there we go. You're back.
I'm back. I didn't hear the question, but I'm here.
All right, I'll ask the question again. From the BIPOC perspective, what are some steps that we can use to recognize medical racism when it's happening, and how can we protect ourselves?
So did you say stats, like STATS?
BIPOC perspective. Yeah, like
Okay.
Black, Indigenous, people of color. Yep.
Oh, stats. Okay, I got you. So how do you recognize medical racism when it's happening? That's a really good question. And in terms of if it's more covert or overt, I think as a person of color, you know what it feels like to be in a room and immediately feel judged. I would assume that that has happened to you before. Correct me if I'm wrong, person who has asked this question, but that feeling that you get of being unheard, unseen, and I guess how can you protect yourself? That's a really, really good question. It depends on what is taking place. Is it something that you feel comfortable addressing? Some individuals, they ask for another provider. Some individuals ask to be referred to a BIPOC provider. Some individuals seek out BIPOC providers as their first choice. And if they can't, because of, being in an area where that's not, possible, they look for alternatives such as a doula, and also try to, come to an understanding with the provider that they do have if they can. At all times it may not be possible because of the structural oppression that is in the medical field. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely, thank you. The other question is, the person said, I'm curious about how this plays out in smaller communities, and what are some strategies for working on creating inclusive healthcare strategies for small towns?
Is it small like this town or small in this town?
Oh, I think Fairbanks is kind of a big town in Alaska, but I guess like in smaller communities where healthcare access to healthcare might be limited.
Right. So there are grassroots initiatives, especially in the state of Alaska. We have the Native First community. I think I'm saying it, Native Birth Workers community. And they are a grassroots organization, and they are going into smaller towns and villages as well and offering their services. And also, if you would like, you can also donate to their initiatives. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And then another question that we got is, what are some ways that non-BIPOC patients can hold our providers accountable for doing this kind of work?
Wonderful question. That's a great question. I would just, for me, I would just make sure that I am doing the work first and foremost. And then in terms, if you happen to come across a conversation, you'll be able to drop gems on that provider and it will just flow and it would be like as natural as possible. So in terms of, let's say you have a concern about the mortality rate, you can be like, oh, well, after the age of 30, Black women are 4 times as likely to die from a childbirth-related complication. What are you guys doing to mitigate that? Gem drop, and then question asked. So I hope that helps you. Just doing the work and being familiar with the stats can be quite helpful. So thank you for that wonderful question.
Absolutely, thank you. And one last question is, how can medical providers get in contact with you in order to have these discussions in their workplace?
Absolutely, great question. So for my BIPOC providers, I have an affinity group, and we just work through vicarious trauma. Thank you for nativebirthworkers.org is the group that I was referring to in the previous question. But I have affinity groups for my BIPOC providers, and then I have a group that I call UPR group. It's Unconditional Positive Regard. And what we do is it is a brave space. It is a space to ask the questions that you may not be able to ask your client because it will discenter the client and center you. And that's not what we want. Of course, there will always be times where you have to ask a question, but I want you to get comfortable enough with asking a question and not centering yourself and making a woolly, my people are terrible type of situation. That's not what we want. We just want our services. So we. Oh, and you can check out my website at the end of that slide, and we can bring it back up too.
Let me bring that website right back up. Screen share. There we go. Yeah, so the website that Reketta is referring to is arisecounselingllc.com and also rspconsultingllc.com. Yeah, and then we have, let me see if we have any more questions. So this is a question that I have, and it's really about if you have had conversations about what racism maybe BIPOC providers experience in the workplace that may be contributing to the, I guess, like upholding the structural racism.
So I guess it's also pretty much individualized as well. I've had BIPOC doulas who want to come into and advocate for the weight of what's being told to them that they would have to communicate to their client. So it's a matter of, well, how do I hold space for my client and not be activated or triggered by what the medical providers are saying? That's one for a doula. And then for a provider that might be a midwife, again, I want to revisit that. Before, we were Black and Indigenous individuals midwives were birthing over 50% of the babies in those communities. And then we were pushed out. And so now you're in the majority white space and you're told this previous generations, your ancestral practices are obsolete, they are unsafe, they're unhealthy. So you're also working through that and trying to navigate that as well.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that answer, and I appreciate your candor. Awesome. It looks like we don't have any more questions coming in. So let me unmute my camera now. There we go. Now you can see me. All right. Well, Reketta, thank you so much for the work that you do and for giving us some of a little glimpse into your world and how you're working to educate towards a safer and more anti-racist medical community. And I want to thank the team that worked together to put this event. We have a few of them in the background, but the Community Coordination Committee, as well as the Executive Board for the NAACP and the folks at the Diversity Action Center, thank you all so much for helping put this together. Before we say goodbye for tonight, I want to thank all of our sponsors and supporters who have supported us financially. And if you would like to donate to our racial justice efforts, here are 2 ways that you can do so. Option 1, you can donate via Venmo, and our username is @Fairbanks with a capital F -NAACP, all capitals, all one word. And then in the notes when you do so, please include racial justice 101, just so that we know that it is specifically for racial justice efforts. The second option is making a check payable to the NAACP using this address on the slide, which is Fairbanks NAACP, and then put attention racial justice 101, just so that we know that it's for these efforts. And here's our address. Anything will help. We do have a suggested donation amount, but like, please, if you want to donate more, feel free to do so. If you want to donate less, that's also anything helps. And these funds are used to compensate our guest speakers and to pay for any administrative costs for Racial Justice 101. And finally, we'd love to hear what you think about our time together. So we do have this feedback form, and if our team can put the link in the chat, it's really to help us make these events better, more accessible, and include topics that you're all interested in seeing in these conversations. And finally, I want to thank Reketta again for your time, your expertise, and for all the great information that you shared with us today. For those who are online, this recording will be available later in the month. So Reketta informed us that they will be presenting something similar in a conference, and we want to make sure that we allow them to do that before we share this recording. But just go to our website, which is fairbanksnaacp.org, and in the menu you'll see Racial Justice 101, and you'll be able to see not only the recording for this event when it's available, but also the recordings of all of our previous workshops. All right, well, thank you all so much, and have a great rest of your night.